Welcome everyone to this new video that I'm randomly uploading after almost a year of inactivity. I know it's been forever since my last video, but there have been a lot of reasons for that I'll get into in the next video I release. However, I will at least say that this show is what motivated me to hurry up and get back into producing these videos again. Obviously, this is an anime, which is something I've never really talked about in a video before. I've decided to just convert the main focus of the channel over to anime instead of continuing my previous history of gaming videos. These days, I just have a lot more passion for it than I do with gaming. Don't get me wrong, I still love playing video games, but creating content around them is especially time consuming, on top of it already being the most saturated market on the platform. So I'm sorry about that to anybody who's subscribed specifically to see that content, but I don't really have any sort of substantial audience yet anyways, so I don't think I'll really be hurting anybody here. Anyways, now that I've got that boring explanation over with, allow me to thoroughly convince you that if you haven't watched this show, you need to drop what you're doing and do so immediately. One last thing to note is that this video will be spoiler free aside from the first episode, as it's meant to convince new people to watch the show. So to begin, I'll briefly explain the show's driving conflict. At first, Attack on Titan appears to be incredibly simple in a lot of ways. Humanity is doomed to be slain like cattle by mindless human-like monsters, who eat them not to nourish their bodies, but simply for no reason at all. The show's protagonist, Eren Yeager, is equally straightforward. All within the very first episode, Eren's hometown is destroyed by the Titans, and his mother is eaten by one. This immediately ignites a burning hatred within Eren's heart. While countless shows use the really angry protagonist trope as an easy way for the main character to power up and overcome all the obstacles in their way, Attack on Titan sets out to do something a lot more interesting with it. If you pay close attention throughout the series, you'll notice that there's something unique about the way some of Eren's comrades perceive his ideals. Characters mention on more than one occasion that his behavior is more monstrous than heroic, and when you think about it, they're absolutely right. Eren is a person who will stop at nothing to get revenge on his enemies and obtain his freedom, no matter what horrific things he has to do to achieve that. Sure, when that attitude is directed exclusively towards giant man-eating monsters, we're sure to cheer him on without hesitation, but when things end up getting a lot more complicated, so does the morality of his actions. While the story may seem to be very familiar at first, it slowly becomes apparent that there is a lot more going on in this world than what it first shows us. Before I get into that any further though, I'm going to break down this series season by season, to explain just how insane the development is between each part of the story. So with that, let's talk about the start of Attack on Titan. This season lacks the depth that you'll see within the later seasons, but there's no doubt that it has a strong hook. It's nothing new as a concept, but the presentation elevates it beyond the usual apocalyptic stuff that's been done to death. The Titans present such a grandiose threat that is complemented exceptionally by the horrifying art direction and beautifully composed soundtrack. The soundtrack is something truly special, but I'll go into that more in a later section. The art and animation, however, are something that helps keep Season 1 thoroughly engaging despite its simplicity. Whether it be showing off the devastating destruction caused by the Titans, or the almost Spider-Man-like mobility of the soldiers who slay them, the animation is done incredibly well. It's really the main thing that drew me in with the first season. Even still, these early episodes don't shy away from major plot twists that further the viewer's intrigue in the story's world. This is something AOT is now famous for, as over the years it has consistently delivered some of the most mind-blowing plot twists I've ever seen in anything. As much as I enjoy this season, I find it to be clearly the weakest overall when compared to what's to come. It's still incredibly enjoyable, but there's just not much to be said about it without delving into specifics. My advice is to go into this season with the expectation that while it will deliver some adrenaline-pumping moments of hype, it might not fully envelop you in its narrative just yet. But don't you worry now, if you decide to continue, it most certainly will. The first half of Season 2 is more or less the same as Season 1, but with more of an emphasis on fleshing out some of the side characters. Up until this point, we really didn't know a whole lot about any of the characters outside the main three. I honestly couldn't name just about any of them before this season expanded their relevance. For example, there's an entire episode dedicated to a flashback from Sasha's past. This flashback does a lot to flesh out her character by showing her throwing herself into a deadly situation just to save one little girl. An event that leads to some fantastic developments for other characters way later in the story. So not only does this serve as a great way to add depth to a side character, but it's also one of the many examples of how AOT is always making the most efficient use of previous scenes to make the whole story feel connected in a way you've never seen before. Something that will become a lot more apparent the further you get into the series. I specifically say Season 2 is more or less the same because there are hints at the fact that there's more going on than we know. At the midway point of this season, we find out exactly why these characters needed more screen time. It's so our minds would be blown when they reveal their true selves and shake up the entire story as we know it. It's a nice step up in terms of giving you more juicy plot details to sink your teeth into. Having said that, there's not much more I can say on it considering it's only half the length of Season 1, and aside from the few improvements I mentioned before, it's very similar to Season 1. Now this is the part where I want to warn you that this show is about to slow things down and start to build the really complex elements of the plot. Do not go into Season 3 expecting the nearly non-stop fist-pumping action of the first 2 seasons. I mean, this season contains some of the most well-animated, jaw-dropping action scenes in the whole series. They just clearly aren't the only focus anymore. This is where we start to really get some answers about what the hell's actually going on here. It also marks the first major shift in the plot's focus, going from humanity's constant struggle against the Titans to conflicts made up of humans with clashing ideals and goals they're fighting towards. This was the beginning of the show's movement towards a world that's less black and white than it was before. It's not fully there yet, it's still pretty clear who you're rooting for. However, it's a lot less clear than before whether or not the actions taken by the heroes are morally righteous. Now, like I said, the show slows down quite a bit for the first half of the season. If I'm being honest, it starts to demand quite a lot from the viewer. There are an incredibly dense amount of details packed within each new episode, so it can get confusing quickly if you try to blaze through all of them at once. I fully recommend that regardless of how you watched it before, that you slow down here and let each episode sit with you for some time. I watched the show as it came out weekly, which gave me plenty of time to think about and digest the content of each episode. You don't necessarily have to wait that long, I mean, do what you want obviously, but if it were me, I wouldn't watch more than 2 episodes a week. From this point on, this story just has so much to keep track of that it's almost essential to do it this way to enjoy it fully. Plan a consistent day or days to watch it, and if you feel like you missed some important details, watch a quick analysis on the episode and you won't regret it. I know for some it may seem off-putting to be told a show demands a lot from you, but trust me, it's all worth it because with AOT, you get out of it what you put into it. Understanding all the details is such an incomparably rewarding experience that I haven't yet found in any other piece of media. Now that you understand the objective way that you have to watch the show, let's move on to the second half of Season 3. The second half of Attack on Titan Season 3 is one of the greatest arcs in all of anime. While the majority of the first half was spent adding tons of new layers to the show's plot, this half is entirely spent on paying off all that buildup. It somehow manages to maintain the complexity established just before, while also providing constant moments of pure hype and dramatic tension. If you think I'm just overhyping it, I welcome you to look up the #1 episode on IMDb's all-time top TV episodes, and see that it holds not only the #1, but also the #2 spot on that list, surpassing every episode of both Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones. In a way, this is the finale for Attack on Titan as you know it so far, as this story is about to change into something entirely new. After all the fights and crazy action and heartbreaking decisions, the biggest mystery that has teased us since the very first episode is finally revealed. The solving of this mystery changes so much about what you thought you knew that it takes some time to even realize just how much. This season's final episodes are filled to the brim with answers upon answers that are so suddenly spilled onto us without warning. What was supposed to provide a glimmer of hope for humanity only revealed how hopeless their situation really is. By the end of this season, the conflict of Attack on Titan is fundamentally changed forever. Okay, so before we move on, I want to talk about the soundtrack. The reason I waited this long to go over the music is because this is where I think the true beauty of the OST for this show is revealed. Up until this point, AOT already had one of the best soundtracks in all of anime. It added so much to the bombast of every action scene, the intimacy of every quiet moment, and the intrigue of this mystery that unravels before us. However, this is the point in the show where everything you thought you knew about the world and plot of this story are completely flipped upside down. Instead of just keeping the same OST used in previous seasons, the show adds a ton of new tracks, while still using just enough of the old ones to maintain its identity. The music perfectly adjusts to fit the newfound complexity of the plot. At the same time though, it perfectly blends familiar melodies from previous seasons, as if to say, this is still the same story, there's just more to it now. Some of what happens from this point on is so incredibly messed up, and I can't even begin to explain how much harder the emotions hit because of the genius ways that the music helps the scenes play out. AOT is well known for its excellent action, but to be honest, all of my absolute favorite scenes are fully dialogue driven. This is of course mainly because of the intricate depth of the conflicts being explored, but I can't help but feel like the music plays a big part in it as well. So yeah, that's about everything I think you need to know before finally going into Attack on Titan. Yes, there's still the final season to cover, which is still currently airing, but the things you'll see in the season are things that I don't even want to vaguely spoil. When the final season wraps up, I'll definitely do another video specifically covering it in more detail than I did with the rest of the show in this video. I will warn though that that video will be spoiling the whole season, so don't go into it expecting something like this one. Anyways, y'all, I'm really glad to be making another video. I've really missed doing this, and I'm glad to have found something I'm more passionate talking about. So if you enjoyed this video, then first of all, go watch AOT right this instant, and second of all, please subscribe if you feel I've earned it. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you back for the next video, which will be covering the first anime that I ever watched. Oh boy.